I just bought an f-mount lens in 2025 as a Nikon Z photographer. But why would I do this when the Nikon Z lenses are far better? Well, there's a couple of huge reasons why this makes sense. The f-mount lens that I ended up buying is this 105mm f2.8, which came out in 2006, which is almost 2 decades ago at this point. And I ended up getting it back in Japan when I bought my 24-120mm f4S. I bought it because there's a lot of times when I'm shooting B-roll of my content and there's a specific detail on a piece of gear that I want to showcase. And by having a macro lens, I can now get those parts in focus and get a unique perspective that I wasn't able to get before. Granted, this isn't a lens that I'm going to be using a lot, but when I am able to use it, I'm able to get a unique perspective that I wasn't able to get before. It's really helped to round out my video kit in particular and fill in gaps that I was dealing with. And going with the f-mount over the z-mount version of this lens made more sense. This lens is far cheaper versus its z-mount counterpart, and since it's a lens that I'm getting for a niche use case, it didn't make sense for me to splurge on the z-mount lens because of the price point. More on that later, but that's why I ended up going with this f-mount lens. The lens itself is actually pretty decent for an almost 2-decade-old lens. The sharpness is fine, not as good as a z-mount glass for sure, but will definitely resolve more than enough detail. It's a pretty wide lens and is very uniform throughout the build of it, keeping a very cylindrical shape from the base to the end of the lens, and does exactly what I needed to do, which is get close focus on small subjects. It can focus up to a foot away and has a 1:1 reproduction ratio, allowing me to get super close to my subject, especially since this is a 105mm focal length. However, one thing that I've been struggling with this lens has been its focus breathing, and man, this lens breathes a lot. For both video and photo, this makes it difficult to get a perfect composition because when you focus close to your subject, the frame will change by enlarging the subject. Especially in video, this can be tough because if I wanted to hit a focus pull, you can visibly see the frame change as well. I know that this is an old lens and I'm not sure if the new updated 105mm corrects for this, or if that's just how macro lenses are in general. But if you know the answer to this question I have, feel free to leave it down in the comment section down below. But nonetheless, this lens still achieves what I needed to do and is more than capable enough to shoot any macro shot that I need. For me, I just don't need all those bells and whistles that the newer Z-mount version of this lens has. But you might be thinking to yourself, well, Nikon finished the entire Nikon Z lens roadmap, so does it still make any sense to get f-mount lenses in 2025? In 2025, we are spoiled with a vast selection of Nikon Z lenses. Nikon has covered majority of their bases when it comes to the different kinds of lenses you can get, and there isn't many niches where lenses aren't available. Essentially, any photographer will be more than satisfied with the Nikon Z lenses and will be able to capture pretty much any niche that they want, which is fantastic, and it's nice to see that the system has matured so fast since its introduction 7 years ago. But if Nikon has all these Z lenses available for anyone to shoot their desired niche, then why does it make sense to get f-mount lenses? To me, there's 2 main use cases for getting an f-mount lens over a z-mount lens. First off is the price difference between f-mount and z-mount lenses, and we can look towards the 105mm as a fantastic example. For the z-mount version of this lens, you can generally find them used on eBay for around $739. Whereas the f-mount version in good condition is around $329. This is a massive price gap where the z-mount version is more than double what the f-mount is. And when I bought my lens in Japan, it was around $300, which is an absolute steal. Granted, there are performance differences between the Z and the f-mount version's lens, with the z-mount obviously performing a lot better, but you still get around like 80% of the same lens, but without double the cost. Going with f-mount lenses can save you a ton of money, which allows you to build out your entire kit for far cheaper and get other pieces of gear that you need. We have to remember that pro-grade lenses like the 24-70mm f2.8 are an f-mount as well and will still perform at a high level without the higher cost of z-mount glass. And if pros back in the day were able to use these lenses perfectly fine for their work, we will be just fine using f-mount lenses for our work. By saving that much money without sacrificing a whole lot on the performance, you can use those savings to travel the world and go out to shoot more, which is far more important than getting the latest and greatest all the time. Granted, Z lenses are still far superior to f-mount glass, but it's nice to have that option to grab a more budget-friendly option, especially for a niche use case like my 105mm f2.8. However, there's a second use case for getting that f-mount over that Z-mount lens, and that's if there is a lens within the f-mount system that the Z lens just doesn't cover. For example, the Z-mount still doesn't have any tilt-shift lenses. Of course, this is a very niche lens to have, but if you're super heavy into architecture and real estate, having a tilt-shift lens is critical to your workflow. And there's still a handful of specific lenses that the Z-mount still doesn't have, like the Nikon 105mm f1.4e, 28mm f1.4e, and the 8-15 f3.5 to 4.5 fisheye. And if you wanted those specific focal lengths and apertures, you would have to go to the f-mount in order to get those lenses. There aren't a ton of lenses in the f-mount that the Z-mount doesn't have, but nonetheless, there are still lenses missing from the Z-mount. To me, these are the two biggest reasons why f-mount might make more sense over Z-mount. But should you still buy an f-mount lens in 2025? So I explained a few reasons why getting that f-mount might make more sense over getting that Z-mount lens. But what if one of the f-mount lenses that you're looking at also has a Z version? What makes sense to do in that scenario? For starters, let's get something out of the way. Nikon Z lenses will always perform better with Z-mount cameras over f-mount glass. They generally will have far superior image quality with better micro contrast, sharpness, and performance overall, but are also lighter and more compact, especially since you don't need an adapter. And they will also perform better with the IBIS mechanism inside a lot of the Z-mount cameras. These are just a few examples, but the list goes on and on. If you're looking for a lens that is a staple part of your kit and something that you're going to be using very often, I would just say go with the Z-mount glass. Yes, it's going to be more expensive, but you'll be much happier in the long run, to be honest. It's a much better experience and will perform at a higher level. I always recommend investing into glass, and sometimes going with the better option isn't a bad investment over the long run, as lenses tend to last a very long time as long as you take good care of it. However, if it's a lens that you have a very niche use case for but aren't going to be using all the time, but you still want to have it in your kit, then I don't see how going with an f-mount lens is a bad option. At the end of the day, you just need to fulfill your use case, and if you can do it in a cheaper fashion while still getting the job done, then I think it makes too much sense. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to spend a ton of money on a lens you'll only use a handful of times. You can use that money for going out and traveling more and shooting, which is always more beneficial than getting the highest end version of the lens. But just because you are only using that lens a couple of times shouldn't mean that you can't get it. Maybe it just means that we can be more calculated in deciding which piece of gear makes most sense to get in f-mount versus the Z-mount. We can still satisfy our needs, but we don't need to spend more than is necessary in order to be taken care of. This has generally been my thought process in buying f-mount over Z-mount, and since I sold off my last f-mount lens 3 years ago, there wasn't really a time that made sense to get an f-mount lens until now. But what do you think about f-mount lenses in 2025? Does it make sense to get them, or should you just stick to the Z-mount stuff? Let me know what you think down in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today, and if you like this video, check this one out right here.